from the time you promised Jaree's mother the outcome, 29 days later, into the case, you found yourself in an 8.5 by 10 room with the suspected killer of 4 women. A psychological duel with more than a confession at stake, trying to learn the fates of these women. What was it like to be in the room with these men, knowing what was at stake?
The pressure was definitely more with Stephen Gordon. Frank Cano had asked for an attorney, and so I knew I wasn't going to get any answers from him. And so by the time Stephen was brought up to the interview room, I knew that he was really my only chance of figuring out, not so much that he had done it, because we knew that they were responsible for killing them, but he was really my only chance of finding out what had happened to these women. Because at this point, yes, we had found Jaree, but we didn't know where Kiana and Josephine and Martha were. And there was a part of me that thought, well, maybe they're buried somewhere. Mm-hmm. It became much more about bringing the women home. I wasn't going to be able to bring them back, but I wanted the families to have the opportunity to say goodbye, closure, give them a proper burial if that's what they decided to do. So it was really more about that. It was the pressure about trying to figure out where the women were. Yeah. And it began a 13-hour conversation that, I'll never forget. Yeah. I heard some things that, nobody should have to hear.
Was that part of building the case? So if you got the DNA and you have them there because you have the ankle bracelets of where they're moving around and scurrying about like rats, is it about closure for the women, or is it also an important element in developing the case for trial ultimately?
I mean, if Stephen had asked for an attorney, I firmly believe the outcome would have been the same. Yeah. I still think he would have been found guilty. I still feel like he would have been sentenced to death. It really was more about getting answers for the family. That's ultimately what he gave me. Yeah. A lot of people think like, well, what's he like? He's actually, he's got moments where he's very charming, boy next door. He's interesting to talk to. He goes, through little phases where when he's very angry and he's on his rants, you can see the evil. Mm-hmm. But then, he'll flip the switch, and you could have a cup of coffee with him and have a very good conversation. And I did. Part of that 13 hours, we had lunch, we had dinner, we talked about music, we talked about sports, all of it just to build that rapport to ultimately get him to tell me where the girls were.
It's remarkable. It's almost like Ted Bundy. You heard the same thing where he was charming, mm-hmm. he was intelligent, University of Utah, yes. I think masters or whatever. But there's the other side, right? There's that switch. So it's fascinating. So you're in a 13-hour interrogation with this man, but in your department you're considered a master interrogator and have honed and weaponized empathy. I think it's fascinating because guys can go in there machismo and walk in there and right. have a threatening demeanor and try to threaten it out of somebody, but you took a different tack. So how do you approach interrogations? I mean, these are murderers. These are people that have taken human life. So mentally, what do you do? Not to give away your trade secrets, because you got to, I understand there's some things you want to protect, but generally speaking, how do you think about going into those situations?
A lot of people ask me that, and I tell them, like, who do you tell your deepest, darkest secret to? Who? You tell it to your best friend. And you're not going to tell it to someone who's, barking at you, who's judging you, who's staring you down, who really seems to not have really any care for you, right? You're not going to tell that person. You're going to tell the person that generally seems interested in hearing what you have to say. Right. So a lot of my interviews is more listening than actually talking, mm-hmm. And really trying to figure out what is it that got them to this place. So I focus not so much on the crime itself, but what led them to that dark spot in their life, right? Mm-hmm. Ultimately, they've committed a mistake. Some of them have committed the ultimate mistake. But it is a mistake, and most of them are generally remorseful mm-hmm. About what they've done. And they want to tell people, hey, look, this is what got me here, and I'm so sorry I did it. And they want to explain. I think people generally want to confess. They just need the right avenue to do it. Right. And they need to do it at their own time. You can't rush a confession. You have to be willing to sit there and talk to someone and hear their story in order for them to tell you what you need. A lot of people make the mistake of talking too much in an interview, and sometimes silence is golden. And when you sit in a room, when you sit across from someone and you're just in silence, they just start talking. They just do. It's human nature. You want to talk.
Yeah, it's brilliant. It's a brilliant strategy. But yet you're in this room with Stephen,
Yes.
And you decided to go in unarmed and sit close without a barrier between you. And again, this guy's a murderer of 4 women. He had certainly ample opportunity, if he wanted to hurt you and to take 15 or so seconds for someone to come help you. Why take this chance? Why put yourself in that situation?
I don't want them to see me as a police officer. I want them to see me as someone who is, and I do generally care about what they have to say. And so I try not to wear my gun or my badge, because that's just a reminder, that I'm a police officer, and that in itself builds up a barrier between them and myself. So I don't do that. And yes, I sit close, and I realize that one of these days I might get popped in the face, and that's a risk that I'm willing to take. But it's when there's a table between you and the suspect, that's protection.
Sure.
You're not very vulnerable when there's this table in between us. But if I go and sit next to you, and all of a sudden I'm just right next to you, and I reach out and I touch your hand, I think that people can feel the transfer of energy. And so when I reach out and I touch their hand and I say, hey, look, I really want to hear what you have to say, I think they know that I mean it, that it's true. And I don't think it's that they made good choices, but I do leave every interview and tell them, tomorrow you get to wake up and be a different person if you choose to do that. Right. This doesn't have to define you. You can choose to do better.